All right, let's go. My name's Josh Myers. I'm the youth and creative pastor here. I love watching you guys as you watch this video. This is one of the many things that I do is put these videos together, and for the first couple of weeks, it's really entertaining to me, especially with this one, because when it kicks in, everybody kind of tenses up just a little bit, or their eyes get wide, whoa, that's a little much there. I have to tell you, draft one was way worse, okay? So draft one, let me just tell you about draft one for a second. My notes for this series was make it heroic, make it intense, and make it just big. And so I was thinking superhero. So the first draft, which does not exist anymore, by the way, was boom, boom, boom in a world, boom, boom, one girl, and sub drop, it was crazy. But I deleted it for good reason, and I started fresh after that. I started another draft, and then another draft, and then another draft, and then another draft. This is draft 12, so if that tells you anything, 12 drafts for a short 30, 20-second video here. And all throughout the process, I'm just looking at this thing, and I'm starting to lose faith that I can even put a good video together. I'm just looking at it man, maybe I should just outsource this video. Maybe I should find somebody else who can do it, because I don't know if this is good enough. I don't know if I'm hitting the mark here. And I think that we do this. It's part of our human nature to do this, to question our own abilities and have multiple drafts of different things and just kind of question if what we're doing is right and if what we're doing is good. And so we start to lose faith in things, in ourselves, in our abilities, in our football team that has a hurt wide receiver and it has a terrible record this year. And we lose faith in things, right? And so I was talking to a neighbor of mine, and he's a Packers fan. And I said, well, are you from Wisconsin? Because I figured that's the only reason that you'd be a Packers fan. And and he said, no, actually, I was a diehard Vikings fan. But the 2009-2010 season was way too much heartache, and I just lost all faith. And I thought that was a really funny way to phrase things. But I think that we do that, right? We lose faith in ourselves, we lose faith in our football team, and we lose faith in God. We lose faith in God over maybe big things, maybe little things. And for a lot of us, it doesn't look like a major shift. We're not on Team Jesus, and 1 week we're, completely a different way on Team Satan. By the way, the Vikings metaphor thing is done right now, so get that out of your head. Anyways, but it's not like a 180 shift. It's kind of, C.S. Lewis describes it as a slippery slope. It's just one or two small steps away from the faith that we once had in God. And so the question that I want to answer today is, why do we lose faith? So as we look at Esther chapter 2 and 3, which you can grab your Bibles, you can flip open to page 411. We're going to start in chapter 3. We're going to go back to chapter 2 in a little bit here. But in chapter 3, we're going to meet a new main character. Okay, for this book so far, we've met the king, we've spent a lot of time with Esther, but we haven't spent a lot of time yet with Mordecai. Now, if you remember, Mordecai got introduced last week. He is Esther's cousin, and he was primarily in charge of Esther's kind of custody when she became an orphan and brought her to the king in the kingdom. Okay, and so we're going to kind of look at Esther, or at Mordecai's story. So starting in verse 1, after these things, King Ahasuerus, which we'll talk about what this means after these things, pretty much everything I just said, the king promoted Haman, the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, and advanced him to set his throne above all the officials who were with him. And all the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning them. But Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage. Okay, so just stop right here and take in the situation. Okay, this is common practice for everybody to kind of pledge their allegiance to the king. So the action was to then bow down and kind of worship that king. But this is the first stand that we're seeing in the book of Esther for somebody to say, no, I'm not going along with that. And so this is what happens then, verse 3. Then the king's servants who were at the king's gate said to Mordecai, why do you transgress the king? And when they spoke to him day after day, and he would not listen, they told Haman in order to see whether Mordecai's words would stand, for he had told them that he was a Jew. Okay, so just quick note here, because this is really important, is that Mordecai is a Jew and that he is now being recognized for being a Jew. And now he's being known to Haman. Why this is a big deal is back in verse 1, we learn that Haman is an Agite. Now, Agites and Jews are enemies, okay? So not only is he not bowing down to the king, but now he is also an enemy of Haman, okay? So this is how he reacts then. Verse 5. And when Haman saw Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage to him, Haman was filled with fury, as you'd expect him to be. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone. So as they had made known to him the people of Mordecai, Haman sought to destroy all Jews, the people of Mordecai, throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. Okay, so one person's actions, Mordecai's actions to stand up for his faith, for what he believes, was then met with this counter of not only him getting punished, but now all of the Jewish people. Okay, so let's pause here for a second. Mordecai finds himself in a situation where he is told by his surroundings to just go along with it, to jeopardize his identity and to bow down and worship something or someone else. Man, it's a really good thing this doesn't happen to us anymore, right? No, of course, this happens to us now. Is we find ourselves in this same situation where the world and our surroundings kind of dictate and change who we are or our identity depending on who and what we're surrounded with. But Mordecai comes and he kind of takes a stand for what he believes in. But I wonder for us, what's surrounding you? What is that thing that you or that person that you are around that has kind of been bringing you away from God? For me, it was when I was 15 years old, and this is one of my really big, passions for youth, is that youth are now being surrounded by different people, by different influencers for their first time. And for me, I was surrounded by friends who bowed down to things like drugs, alcohol, sex, or just flat out being depressed. They glorify depression, that like, man, life sucks, life is not getting any better, it's hard, and so you should be as miserable as I am. And no matter how much I tried to out-positive that, no matter how much I tried to add humor to the situation, no matter how much I tried to, fill it up with, kind of life cliches and worldly cliches, it never worked. It was never enough. I needed a Savior. I needed Jesus. I needed to be surrounded by someone or something different, and I needed to bring Jesus into my surroundings. And that's exactly what Mordecai does here. He brings Jesus into the place, or he brings God into the place that doesn't want to hear it, that wants him to bow down and worship something else. And so what's that thing for you? What's surrounding you right now that is bringing you further from your relationship with God? Is it a negative person? You have a negative coworker, family member, something like that, that's just no matter how chipper and how positive you try to be, they always have to add something to it to make everything just worse. and just make everything sound like this big sob story. Or maybe you're surrounded by people who don't even know God or don't acknowledge God, and they want you to bow down and worship something that they worship, power, money, control, whatever it is. Or maybe we got to watch out for this one too. Maybe you're surrounded by believers, but they're not living like believers. Meaning somebody who says that Jesus is Lord of their life, but if you look at their actions and you look at what they're bowing down to, what they're talking about, whether it be sports, hobbies, kids' sports, gossip, whatever it is, that maybe they're trying to get you to bow down to the thing that they view more important than God. And so what's surrounding you? Because as Christians, we are called to stand up as Mordecai did and stand up for our faith and infect our surroundings instead of stooping to our surroundings. I love this quote. It says, "A Christian in his surroundings should encourage everyone to be better instead of being one who stoops to be like everybody else." But I think if we're being honest, a lot of us change. A lot of us change our identity. A lot of us change the way that we talk, the way that we act, based off of who we're surrounded by. And so Mordecai, though, he doesn't take that. He doesn't take that lightly, and he decides to take a stand. But then a situation out of that arises. So verse 7, continuing on here, in the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year, King Ahasuerus, they casted purs, which is lots. So this is a way of saying they rolled dice, okay? Before Haman, day after day, and they casted it month after month till the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Okay, quick little note here that's going to be really important for later. Pay attention to timeline, okay? There's a lot of time going by in chapter 3. What we see here is that Haman and his people are rolling dice for a year, okay? For 12 months, he's rolling dice to decide whenever those dice fall in the right direction, that's when I'm going to bring up my plan to annihilate the Jews to the king, okay? So that took a year. And then in verse 8, then Haman said to the king, Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered abroad, and among these people in your provinces of their kingdom, their laws are different from those of every other people, and they don't keep the king's laws, so it's not in the king's profit to tolerate them. I read this part with so much humor because he is just selling it, okay? He is just, do you ever have this situation where somebody gives you a precursor before they introduce you to their weird friend, right? Most of the time I'm the weird friend, but they give you this precursor, right? This okay, so before you meet them, you need to know this and this and this and this. And so he's kind of he's really selling this, that, hey, before I propose to you this thing, I need to tell you about these people because they're terrible, okay? Now in verse 9, look what he does. He says, if it pleases the king, let it decree that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who have charge of the king's business, that they may put it into the king's treasuries. Okay, so Haman's he's totally in this. Not only is he offering to do the work, not only is he offering to supply or a reason for the work, but now he's going to pay for it. Okay, this is a boss's dream, that he's going to put it all together for him. And so the king says, yeah, of course, why not? So he took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews. And the king said, the money is given to you, the people also, to do with them as it seems good to you. Okay? So this was common practice back then take the ring, and that's to prove that this whole agreement was approved by the king. And then the author does a great job here at reiterating who Haman is, that he is an Agagite, which is an enemy of the Jews, that he's a bad guy, that he is out to destroy the Jewish people. Okay? And now he gets this big just allowance to do whatever he wants. Okay? It's war without anybody fighting back. It's killing people without any kind of consequence whatsoever. I kind of think about it like this. It's like Columbine without consequences. If you guys remember back in 1999, there was this really tragic school shooting, and it was kind of the first domino to fall in just a really bad thing that's happened in our country over years of school shooting. And if you remember the story of this school shooting, is there were two gunmen that went around in the school, and they would ask a question before they shot. And that question was said to be, do you believe in God? And there were two girls who unfortunately answered yes, and that ended their lives. And I think that every time we hear that story, or at least every time I hear that story, it brings up this feeling of me in what would I say? What would we say? Like if somebody, if the stakes were that high, would we say yes? Or would we just say no? Would we say, yes, Jesus is the Lord of my life with joy? Or would we say no? And that's the kind of stakes that Mordecai is at right now, where he's just, this is life or death. This is the situation for him. Now, it might not be a life or death situation for us, but I believe that there are situations like this that come up in our lives that start to kind of get us to ask, God, where are you? God, are you even there? Are you even listening? Do you even see what I'm going through? And so the question for us is, what situation has made you lose faith? What is it in your life previously, or maybe in your life now, that you maybe haven't examined close enough to see how much of a hit that was for you and your relationship with God? Maybe it's that you're just looking at the world. You're looking at war happening in Ukraine and Israel. You're looking at the economy. You're looking at everything, and you're just thinking, God, are you even here? Do you even see the situation? Or maybe it's something more personal. Maybe you're going through some kind of health thing or mental health thing, and you've been to tons of doctors, you've seen specialists, you've gotten pills, you've gotten all of these things, and nothing seems to be working. And you see people getting healed and stories of healing in the Bible, and you're thinking, God, do you see me? Do you see my situation right now? Or maybe it's something like a relationship thing. Maybe with a family member or a wayward child, or it's hurt from people in the church or whatever it is that just makes you go, God, are you seeing this? Do you see what I'm going through? Do you even care what I'm going through? Maybe it's job questioning, money, whatever thing has been in your life that has made you say, God, are you there? Do you see what I'm going through? Do you see how hard and difficult this is? And I have to imagine, even though it's not in the text, I have to imagine Mordecai, to some extent, has to be thinking, man, God, are you here? Are you seeing what's about to happen to your people? And I think that what makes situations even harder and more difficult is when we have to wait. Is when we have to wait for God to show up. And that's exactly what happens to Mordecai. So going forward here in verse 12, the king's scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month, and an edict was according to all that Haman commanded, was written to the king's satraps and to the governors over all of the provinces, and to the officials of all peoples, to the province in its own script, and every people in its own language. It was written in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the king's ring, so you knew it was legit. Now listen to this, verse 13. Letters were sent by couriers to all of the king's provinces with instructions to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate the Jews, young and old, women and children. Man, that sounds familiar. In one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. So not only is the order being given to now destroy the Jewish people, but also you can take their stuff too. Okay? A copy of the document was to be issued as a decree in every province by proclamation to all the peoples to be ready for that day. Okay? One quick thing I need you to see here again. Another year has gone by. This whole process of translating this document and getting it out by couriers and getting it out to everybody who needed to hear, another year has gone by, okay? The couriers went out hurriedly by the order of the king, and the decree was issued in Susa, the citadel, and the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city was thrown into confusion. So typical king with typical servant, they're just going to make this big life-altering, world-changing decision and then get drunk. And that's what they decide to do. But even more so, what's important here is that now the Jewish people, now everybody in the city, not just the Jewish people, everybody in the city is left in this suspense, is left in this waiting, okay? They're about to get destroyed and killed and annihilated. And you have to be thinking, like, as a Jewish person, are you thinking like, oh, do we fight back? Like, do we got to get ready to fight, or do we just back down and just trust that God's got this? Or is there a plan? Is there something happening? And they're just waiting in suspense. And I think that some of the hardest places to be is when you're just waiting on God. So what's been keeping you in suspense? What's been keeping you waiting on God, where you're just like, God, okay, I don't know if you're there. Are you ever going to come? I used to work in a hospital as a security guard. I know I don't look like it, but I worked as a security guard, and I worked in the emergency department, and I sat at the triage desk with the triage nurses. And what was really interesting about working in the emergency room is that people would come in for tons of different reasons, okay? I saw a lot of things I saw. Shortness of breath, kidney stones. I saw one person come in with a fishing lure stuck to his cheekbone. I believe his name was Mark Katzenberger, but that's a story for another time. I'm kidding. But I saw a lot of crazy things. And probably in the weirdest way possible, one of the most entertaining things about working in the emergency room was watching that nurse's door open and watching everybody in the waiting room go. And just like they're waiting for their name to be called. And then when because they wanted to be called back. And I cannot tell you the number of people that walked up to that desk and said to me, how much longer? Because I might just leave. And I wonder how many times we do that to God. I've done it, where my first thing that's out of my mouth during prayer time is, how much longer? How much longer do I have to wait for you to show up and do something? And I think it's in those moments that we have to realize that while we're waiting, God is working. That's been a theme of the book of Esther, is that while something may seem on the surface like it's happening, that God is still working in the background. So with this hospital story, one thing that I didn't mention is that while people were in the waiting area, there was a room being prepared for them. Okay, we had already triaged them, so we already knew what kind of care they needed, so we were preparing the right doctors, the right nurses, x-rays, MRIs, whatever things needed to be done for that patient's care was being prepared in advance. You need to know that whatever thing you are waiting on God for right now, whatever situation that you are going through, what's keeping you in suspense, if it seems like right now you're just waiting and saying, God, where are you? Am I ever going to get called back? God is still working. God is still moving in the background. He is still doing something. But you have to wonder in Esther, you have to wonder in this whole bit of, standing up for his faith that Mordecai did, how did he have that assurance? How did he walk with that faith so boldly that he was able to stand up and say, no, I'm not bowing down? Because remember, this is the first time we've seen anybody stand up and not go along with the status quo. And I think we kind of find our answer in chapter 2. So I want to go back to chapter 2 and then look at chapter 3 again. Starting in verse 19, we didn't read this last week, but this is a really interesting story here that we have to highlight in order to see how Mordecai was able to walk in this kind of boldness. Okay, so now when the virgins were gathered together the second time, so this whole bachelor show is going on, like we said last week, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, okay? Esther had not made known to her kindred or her people as Mordecai had commanded her, for Esther obeyed Mordecai just as when she was brought up by him. So she hasn't said anything about her background, her heritage, her beliefs, anything like that. She's just been quiet, okay? In those days, as Mordecai was sitting out at the king's gate, there were two of the king's eunuchs, that's their guards, who guarded the threshold and became angry and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And this came to the knowledge of Mordecai, and he took it to Queen Esther. And Esther told the king in the name of Mordecai. When the affair was investigated and found to be so it was true, the men were both hanged on the gallows, and it was recorded in the book of Chronicles in the presence of the king. Okay, so why this is important is that I have to believe the reason that Mordecai took a stand is he started to see that maybe God is up to something in the background. That maybe, even though I don't see it, that God has a plan for this. Because you think about how much we've been through already. Chapter 1, there was a need for a queen, okay? And then Esther becomes that queen in chapter 2. And Mordecai is seeing this happen. And then Mordecai just happens to be in the right place at the right time to hear two guards who are scheming to kill the king. And then he just happens to have an inn, the most important inn in the kingdom, with the queen, with Queen Esther. And then he sees that as he's able to tell Esther that it's not just something he's saying, but it's followed up on. Okay, they follow up on an investigation. And so now he's starting to see maybe God's doing something. So I'm going to take a stand. And so he takes a stand, and then look at in chapter 3, lot casting. Rolling the dice takes a year. Issues of those documents going out to all the kingdoms takes another year. All of this time is going by between chapter 3, and all of that time, Esther is building relationship. She's building relationship with the king in the kingdom to set us up for exactly what needs to happen next week in chapter 4. But I have to believe that what Mordecai starts to see is that God is always in the right place at the right time. And I think that's something that we need to be assured with as well. That God is never late. He's never really early either. But that God is always in the right place at the right time. And so while you may feel surrounded by people that are bringing you away from faith, while you may feel like you're in a situation right now where you're just going through some stuff, or you may feel like God's not there, and you're asking these same questions. God, where are you? God, are you there? God, are you ever going to pull through and show yourself? When we're stuck in those situations, we have to remember that God is always in the right place at the right time. And just to give us this assurance, because I find myself stuck in this place all the time, where I find myself in a situation or surrounded by something that's just really tearing down my faith, or I'm waiting on God, I find it really, really hard to continue. I find it really, really hard to keep faith. I find it really hard to stand up just like Mordecai did. But I remember this verse, and I want to just invite the worship team up, and I just want us to really reflect on this verse from 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 6 through 7. This is something that I always go back to when I feel like I have those questions like, God, where are you? And it says this, so be truly glad. There is wonderful joy ahead, even though you must. Does it say you might? It says you must endure some trial. No, many trial for how long? A little while. These trials will show that your faith is genuine, that your faith is real. It's being tested as fire tests and purifies gold, though your faith is far more precious than gold. So when your faith remains strong through trials, it will bring much praise and glory and honor on the day when Jesus is revealed to the whole world. And so if you don't know anything about the gold purification process, if you have a gold ring, at some point it was corroded with tons of other material and tons of other elements. And in order to get the purity of that gold, it had to be put under fire, under intense heat, okay? And for when that happens, then you saw the purity of that gold. For us, sometimes we have to go through hard times. Sometimes it gets really hot and we're feeling like we're getting burned by the world. But it's in those very instances that we have to remember, though those trials may come, and there might be many of them, they only last a little while. And that those trials are the very thing that shows that our faith is real, that shows that our faith is genuine. So when you find yourself surrounded by people that are not worshiping God and idolizing other things, when you find yourself in a situation and you're just asking, God, where are you? When you find yourself kind of left in suspense, like, is God ever going to show up? We have to remember that there is wonderful joy ahead. That even though the trials are hard, it's showing that our faith is real. And that our faith is not put in the wrong direction. That if God has been faithful to us once, he'll be faithful again. For every breath that we breathe, it's a sign of his faithfulness. For everything, every trial that we've already came and went through, it's a sign of his faithfulness. And so during this last worship song, I just want to invite you into this moment where you just thank God for being faithful through the hard times that you've had in life, and maybe give God this morning some of the things that you're surrounded with, some of the situations that you're waiting on God to show up in. And just believe that if God has been faithful once, he will be faithful again. Let's pray together. God, I thank you so much for your faithfulness. God, I thank you for your goodness. And I pray that as we leave this place, we would stand up for our faith amongst all of the other things that life throws at us, whether personal, whether worldly, God, that we would just be people of faith. That even though we don't see it, even though we don't understand it, we know you. And we know that you are good and that you are faithful. And so, God, thank you for that. And we praise you for that in your name. Amen.